Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com, here with the top 10 cards that I won't miss post-rotation. So it's that time of year again where we get to say goodbye to these terrible cards as Standard rotates out and Throne of Eldraine rotates in. So I also will be doing a top 10 cards that I will miss post-rotation, and I'm actually quite disappointed with the historic format not just being cards that are rotating out. They've actually added some very powerful cards from the history of Magic, cards like Gristlebrand, into MTG Arena, and I think that's going to mess up the format. I was hoping for like a Modern Light type format or like a Frontier type format where we can experiment with the various cards from not too long ago with the newer sets. Cards like Knights and Zombies look really cool with this new Throne of Eldraine set, as well as if they go back into Amonkhet, we'd have some cool little tribal builds that could be powerful enough to see play. However, that's not going to be the case. Historic is just going to be like eventually a modern type format where they bring in just cards. Who even knows? They might even bring legacy cards into the mix. And I'm just not a fan of that sort of thing. I'd like a dumbed down power level in between standard and modern, and not have these incredibly powerful cards like Gristlebrand being added immediately to the mix. Anyway, we'll have to talk about that in another video. This video, I'm going to focus on the top 10 cards that I'm not going to miss post-rotation. Usually I can pick like 15, 20 cards, no problem, that I'm glad I see gone. But this standard is actually not that deep of cards that I did not like. They're definitely my top 3 are biggies, but 10 through 6 I think are just like, I'd prefer them not to be in standard, but they weren't terrible. They weren't that warping to the format. So again, this ended up being a pretty decent standard. I mean, there are definitely time periods where there were stale standards, but right now it's pretty decent. And I would say during Guilds of Ravnica it was good. The only time this was exceptionally bad in this rotation, I would say, was Ravnica Allegiance. And I would say Core 2020 was a little bit stale for a bit there. Or before Core 2020 was a bit. But yeah, there was Ravnica Allegiance, War of the Spark era. We had some pretty stale standards. But other than that, again, there is not too many cards that I had an issue with. But we are going to rant, though. We are going to complain, that because that's what I do best here at Rogue Deck Builder, is complain about things. So let's start with the complaining. So on to my number 10. My number 10 is Drowned Catacomb / the rest of the cards of these check lands. So again, this is barely making my top 10 list just because I'm kind of sick of the just exceptional mana we have in standard right now. Whenever you pair shocks plus check lands, it makes for easy 3-color, 4-color decks with no mana problems. And I think it really enables the Esper strategies and the Mardu strategies. And I'd like to see a little bit of a toning down of the power level of the mana base. And so without Drowned Catacombs, the shock becomes, just the check lands, the shock lands become not as effective. And I think it really slows down the format with just either the temples or the gates or the scry lands. They just definitely don't have that 1-2 punch like the check lands and the shock lands. It's fun for a while, but I've had my fill of that, and I'm glad that we're going back to a slower mana base. So we go on to our number 9. My number 9 is going to be Lightning Strike. Now again, this barely made the list because there's a worse card than Lightning Strike in my top 10 that I think just warped the format. But I think everyone else, I can speak for everyone else, we're sick of Mono Red. Mono Red is the noob deck of all noob decks. You see it on MTG Arena like crazy. You have to grind through it just because it's so linear. And the problem was they created 3 Lightning Bolt effects in the same format with the Wizard's Lightning, Lightning Strike, and the Skewer. And then you also had Shock on top of that, and exceptional card draw through the new Chandra from War of the Spark, from Experimental Frenzy, from Risk Factor, and then even couple that with the fact that you have mana generation with the Runaway Steamkin, and it just made a very boring format trying to have to play against Mono Red over and over and over again. And I don't like the response they've done to that, which is just slapped on life gain to a bunch of cards. So it's going to be fun to have a format that doesn't have 3 bolts in it, and 2 of them are going out. So Mono Red now has to go back to like more of a red deck win strategies with more creatures rather than just bolts to the face. And I'm glad to see this one go. I've had my fill of Lightning Strike, Wizard Lightning, Skewer of Critic deck. And I think everyone else, I can say the same for everyone else. We're sick of this archetype. Alrighty, so on to my number 8. Number 8 is Scapeshift. Again, this barely made my list just because I'm getting kind of tired of the field of of Dread plus Scapeshift deck. Couple it with Teferi, where you can cast this instant speed. It makes a very linear deck as well. You're just going to stall, then lock people out with Teferi, where they can't cast a counterspell or anything for the Scapeshift, and then attacking with a bunch of zombies. Just a boring deck to face. We've faced it all a million times, and it's just, Scapeshift is just an okay card when it doesn't have a busted land with it. I think the power level of coupling those two lands together is just too much for standard, and of course it's just taken over the meta. I mean, I don't even know if it's that big of a percentage of the meta now, but for a while there, it definitely was the most dominant deck, and it was the same game over and over, and I'm just glad that this is gone, since we have Core 2020 for an entire year, and we don't have to see that sort of combination in standard. On to the number 7. My number 7 is the Steel Leaf Champion. Again, this barely made the list, and it's just because I don't like the design of these particular cards. I'm not a big Stompy fan, and especially in a format where it's got evasion on top of a 5/4 body. I get it. There are worse threats to this, and people might make fun of me. It's just a design standpoint with Llanowar Elves and a Steel Leaf Champion. It wasn't a good strategy because of just the removal that was pretty good with Lava Coil, and the one that kills a non-legendary creature, Cast Down. Both of those were in the format to keep this sort of strategy in check, and it ended up not being a very good card too, because it got outpaced very quickly by 4 and 5 drops. However, I typically don't like these linear cards and linear strategies, especially with the Llanowar Elves. Llanowar Elves might make my top 10 cards that I'm going to miss post-rotation, because I do like having a 1-drop mana dork in the format. However, Steel Leaf Champion just seems like a very boring, linear card, and I'm glad to see it go. It's just not a fan of these type of cards. I've talked about it in the past about the Sam Stoddard cards. May he rest in peace. No longer works with Wizard of the Coast. However, these type of linear, stompy, turn your card sideways type cards, never been a fan of them, and I'm glad to see this one go. On to my number 6. My number 6 is going to be the Rampaging Ferocidon. This, of course, should probably be higher up on the list if it wasn't banned for the majority of this standard, almost all of this standard. It was recently unbanned, though, and this is a miserable card to play against in that dinosaur deck where you can't gain life if you cast a creature taking damage. It's a very explosive deck. It almost feels like you need to be in Kaya's Wrath type decks or any sort of Wrath type because the Ferocidon with the other dinosaurs just it basically beats all the other aggro-based strategies, or if you try to go wide-based strategies. So I think this was another push card. There was just too much in this card with Menace. Players can't gain life, and then dealing damage every time a creature came into play. Just too much for a 3-drop. So it was just a poor design card. Something needed to give here. Maybe the toughness going down to a 3/2 so it could get shocked. Maybe the power going down to a 2/3. Maybe Menace being taken away. Something with this card just needed to be toned down power level because it was just too powerful and too impactful for the standard format. On to my number 5. Number 5 is going to be the Goblin Chain Whirler. So this is where I guess it ramps up of annoying amount of cards. This is another red card that was just pushed too much for a 3-drop. 3/3, first strike, enters the battlefield, deals 1 damage to each opponent, each creature, and each planeswalker they control. So it's just not included in every red deck since it was printed, because it just did everything it wanted to do. It kept the damage rolling. It required a removal spell. It took care of at least a loyalty of a planeswalker, so they're more manageable to then ping down. And this was another card with Experimental Frenzy and Runaway Steamkin, just gave you outs to find ways to then wipe the board. Very annoying card. There was a time period that it was even combined with I'm trying to think of the scroll card, where it amplified the damage of red cards for the turn. And it was a miserable card in the format. It was very, very hard to... one of the ways you typically can beat like mono-red strategies is have go-wide strategies. And so printing a card that just was that and Rampaging Ferocidon, which was just the silver bullet versus go-wide strategies, was very, very annoying to deal with in the standard format. So I'm not going to miss Goblin Chain Whirler at all post-rotation. On to my number 4. So this is where it starts to get a lot more juicy. I would say that I'm pretty much okay. Maybe 5 and 6 deserve to be on this list. 6, 7, 8, or 7, 8, 9, and 10 are, I was grasping at straws here to try to fill up this list. But these are where we're starting to get cards that I absolutely despise. I cannot stand these cards, and especially 1 and 2. So my number 4 is going to be the Galta Primal Hunger. Talk about the linear Timmy card that is just absolutely annoying. And now with the new dinosaur that gives +2/+0 whenever a dinosaur comes into play, it does 2 damage to a creature when it comes into play, and also reduces the cost of the creature. And then you have the dinosaur gives it haste. It's just such a cheese deck when they hit their magical Christmas land curve and they get their what's the one that gives all dinosaurs haste out on turn? I believe they can get out on turn 4, and then also Galta on the same turn because there's enough power. Correct me if I'm wrong if that's the case, if they can get it out that quickly or not. But it's happened before where it's just, one turn, slap down a bunch of stuff, and all of a sudden you're getting hit with like 21 haste damage on the same turn, and it's like, all right, whatever. So yeah, I'm not gonna miss Galta Primal Hunger. It's just one of those linear Timmy strategies that are just incredibly annoying. It gets removed by just one removal spell, but it does require you to have those removal spells in your deck or you just get run over by these type of cards. So I'm not going to miss Galta. I know a lot of people might enjoy this card, but I'm definitely not one of them that enjoys these all-in linear type strategies. Okay, on to my number 3. My number 3 is the Wizards of Lightning. Surprise, surprise, this one coming. I talked about it about Lightning Strike. This one being reduced with the Wizards. The problem was there was just too many good Wizards that synergize with this card in that mono red deck. There was basically a 2/3 haste card as well as a 2/1 that did 2 damage to the face when it came into play. Then they both reduced the cost of the Wizards Lightning. And again, this card was just miserable for having the 3 bolts in the format. We already talked about Lightning Strike, so I'm not going to focus too much on this card. I'd say that I hate Wizards Lightning more than Lightning Strike because, the difference between 1 mana and 2 mana is pretty big. And so this led to more of the cheese draws where the mono red player had the get you on turn number 1, and then they're able to sling out 2 lightning strikes, for example, on for just 2 mana, 6 damage to face on a particular turn. Couple that with Runaway Steamkin and Experimental Frenzy, and there was just some insane comebacks from the red deck, which was just miserable to play against. Hated the deck, hate that sort of strategy, and I'm glad to see this card go. That leaves us with 2 cards, and there's a huge gap between my number 2 and number 3. I think that these were the worst cards in Standard for their periods of time when they were popular, and I'm glad to see these cards go. And you'll be surprised with number 2. I think a lot of people that might know my ranting and whining might think that it's number 1, but there's a card even worse than number 2, which is the Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. I have a problem when Wizards creates a card that is a card draw engine, can protect itself, and a win condition all in one card. And that is exactly what Teferi, Hero of Dominaria is. You don't even have to play any win conditions in your deck with your draw engine being Teferi. It can be the win condition. I think this was another card that just wasn't play tested enough when they designed the card, and it needed a little bit of corrections here, especially on the -8, being able to exile, exile non-land permanents, and then it would need an actual finisher besides Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. And there's just a lot of synergy with Hero of Dominaria and like Wilderness Reclamation, and then the Search for Azcanta that just really pushed this over the top in Standard. And this just was a very miserable card. It got a little bit better last rotation when a lot of its favorite cards rotated out, but it still was a pain of a card to deal with. And so I'm glad that Teferi, Hero of Dominaria is gone. It still is very powerful for Modern, so a 5-mana Planeswalker that is playable in Modern, is going to create problems in Standard. So we will not miss you, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, but now we have to deal with the other Teferi, the 3-drop Teferi, which I think is just as oppressive as Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, except for the fact that you do have to play a win condition with the other Teferi. It can't just be an all-in good card. All right, so what actually tops Teferi for my number 1 most hated card that I'm glad is gone? This is another fail of a design. This is another one that they just did not play test it or read through exactly how it worked and then actually created cards that made this card go bonkers. This is none other than the Nexus of Fate. Nexus of Fate was just a horribly designed card. It wasn't supposed to be standard playable. They made this for Commander. In fact, they created an ability which made it weaker in Commander than if it would go in your graveyard. And they didn't want this to exile like other take extra turns. So like, hey, how can we make this fair? Let's shuffle it into the deck. Well, in a Search for Azcanta type format, or any type of format that can really dig for cards, which has been this past standard, Next of Fate was just too easy to set back up. And with the printing Wilderness Reclamation, this card had to actually be banned in best of ones because it was just so miserable to play against on Arena. So Next of Fate, 7 mana, horribly designed card. I'm glad it's gone. Wilderness Reclamation still, of course, in the format. So this deck doesn't see as much play as it used to, but it still comes around every now and again when the mid-range or control type decks are more prevalent than aggro. Aggro was keeping it down. There are definitely some strategies that are good versus the Next of Fate decks, but in best of one Arena, when you don't have the sideboard, this was the most miserable card until they did ban it. So that's just my overview of the top 10 cards that I am glad are rotating. So it's, again, there's a huge gap between 2 and 3, and then from 3 to 6 is like cards that I'm like, yeah, I'm glad they're going. And then the last 4, again, I was just grasping at straws at that point. This has been a pretty good standard. There's actually more cards currently in standard that I'd rather see go than most of these cards, but that'll have to wait a year for that video. And I guess we're going to be moving on now to the top 10 cards that I will miss post-rotation, and we'll have that video out tomorrow. So I'm interested in your top 10 cards that you won't miss post-rotation. Is your list different than mine? Did I just miss a card that was just a problem on the format that just gave everyone headaches and you're glad it's gone? Leave it in the comment section below and let's start a war. Anyway, this has been Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.